This presentation is an attempt at trying to put faces on the names of the ships involved with the War of 1812 on Lake Erie, where they came from, what they looked like, how they were armed and what happened to them. This is the gunboat Philadelphia. It is not involved with the war on Lake Erie, nor did the Americans use gunboats in this campaign. When referring to the Battle of Lake Erie, I hate to use the term gunboat. It makes the smaller ships sound unimportant. They were far from that. At first, James Madison suggested the Navy purchase merchantmen on the lakes because they could be refitted more cheaply than building new ships, but then it was pointed out that the British already had a 17-gun warship on Lake Erie. The United States would need both. When it was finally decided the United States needed a fleet on Lake Erie, word was given to purchase existing merchantmen. Enter Jesse Duncan Elliott. He was ordered by the Secretary of the Navy to report to Black Rock Naval Station near Buffalo on September 24, 1812. Upon arrival at that place, he eyes the Caledonia and former U.S. brig Adams, now renamed Detroit, lying at anchor under the guns of opposing British Fort Erie, and he decides the U.S. Navy must have them too. He conducts a daring nighttime raid and is successful in cutting out both ships, but only manages to get the Caledonia to the American side. The Detroit runs aground and is destroyed by both British and American fire. Where is Black Rock? I thought all of Perry's ships were built in Erie. Here is a map of Black Rock in 1813. As you can see, it is just inside of the Niagara River off Lake Erie. Fort George lies to the right of the map before Lake Ontario. It fell on May 27, 1813. Both Jesse Elliott and Oliver Hazard Perry participated in this raid. Those of us that live in Erie think we have cornered the market on the Battle of Lake Erie. To fully understand this great story, it must be understood that Buffalo, Erie, and Put-in Bay all played equal parts. Turning merchantmen into men of war. Reinforcing the upper decks. Why? To support the heavy guns. This was the work that went on at Black Rock when the British batteries from across the river weren't taking pot shots at us. The types of guns. Carronade or long gun, truck-mounted or on slide pivot. This was the standard of the day for both the fleets on Lake Erie. The long gun, working range 1,600 yards, max range 2,000 yards with elevation. 1,760 yards equals 1 mile. The 32-pound carronade, 330 yards effective range. Maximum range 650 yards. A short barrel and lower muzzle velocity, nicknamed the Smasher, for creating maximum damage. Range between 1/4 and 1/3 of a mile. For reference, 880 yards equals 1/2 a mile. The pivot slide mount. This is how the guns were mounted on most of the smaller ships. Perry's first flagship on Lake Erie. The first of the Black Rock Five. The U.S. brig Caledonia. Built by the British at Emersburg, Ontario in 1807. Captured in a raid by J.D. Elliott. 180 tons burthen weight. Between 80 and 90 feet long. A slow sailer. The ship that held the Niagara back during the early part of the battle. Commanded during the battle by Lieutenant Daniel Turner. This is her gun deck plan. Two 12-pound long guns fore and aft with a 32-pound carronade amidships. This is the ship Jesse Elliott boarded when he brought up the rest of the fleet. It was reported that he found sailing master, Thomas Alamy, drunk and relieved him of duty. The Queen Charlotte surrendered to Elliott when he was in command of this ship due to the raking fire laid down by the Somers as he approached the Queen from astern. Later in 1814, on the night of August 12, anchored off Fort Erie, the Somers and the Ohio would be captured by a British raiding party. The schooner Porcupine escaped. This would be the last action on Lake Erie during the War of 1812. A merchantman converted for battle. This is what the Somers might have looked like. The Somers gun deck. Raking fire from this long 24 is what prompted the white flag on a pike to be flown off the stern of the Queen Charlotte. Lieutenant Stevens was 18 years old, and newly promoted from midshipman. He was removed from Niagara after an argument with Jesse Elliott. Perry then gave him command of the Trippe while at Put-in-Bay. Trippe was rumored to have had a Hawkins mount tried before the battle, but it was removed in favor of the single long 24, a Bermuda sloop rig, very seaworthy and fast if well handled. The Ohio missed the Battle of Lake Erie. Perry sent Dobbins back to Erie after supplies. The beef hastily put up in Erie by contractors had spoiled. Dobbins later claimed he could hear what he thought was thunder while loading in Erie. A model of the Ohio at Vermilion Maritime Museum. Formerly the General Wilkinson, built by Abbott and Company of Detroit in June of 1801. She was bought by the Porter Barton Company of Buffalo and renamed Amelia, then sold to the United States Navy. She lays at the bottom of Misery Bay. The 1979 Underwater Survey says so. Amelia might have looked like this. Jesse Elliott wrote to Daniel Dobbins, "It seems utterly impossible to build ships at Presque Isle. I am under the impression Lake Erie has not a single harbor calculated to fit out such an expedition. And the only convenient one I am at present at," referring to Black Rock. But he does sign the letter, with sentiments of respect, Jesse Elliott. Daniel Dobbins wrote back, "I believe I have as perfect knowledge as any man on it," referring to the lake, "and I think you would agree with me if you were here." Elliott later agreed with Dobbins when he finally came to Erie. Both men spoke well of each other after that. Erie in 1813, from a map done by Robert E. Ernst in 1972 and edited by me. Erie had two shipyards. The Lee's Run Yard. The Bayfront Highway runs through it. From an excellent article that appeared in the Erie Times News by Linda Bola. The Cascade Creek Yard. Deeper water was necessary to launch the bigger ships. Lawrence, Niagara and Ariel were launched here. The Erie ships. Really three sets of sisters. Porcupine and Tigress. Ariel and Scorpion. Lawrence and Niagara. Not much is known about Ebenezer Crosby. He was a shipwright from the Buffalo area and probably worked for Porter Barton at one time. He is skilled at building merchantmen for the lake trade. He is 41 years old. It was probably Daniel Doblin's vast list of contacts in the lake trade that brought him to Erie. He fades out of the picture about the time Noah Brown comes to Erie. It was said Porcupine got its name because one was captured close to where the ship was being built. Later in 1814 the Tigris would be captured with the Scorpion on Lake Huron. These two were the smallest ships in the American fleet but carried the biggest guns, a 32-pound long tom. Similar to what Porcupine and Tigris might have looked like. The bones of the Porcupine on a beach near Spring Lake, Michigan. She had her name changed to the Catherine and was used as a lumber lugger until 1873 when she could go no further. Her bow points towards Put-in-Bay and Erie. Parts of the ship were exhumed for the centennial celebration. Ariel and Scorpion, separated sisters. Scorpion was in frames but not too far along to be altered when Eckford visited. Ariel was just a keel. Twice the long-range firepower of the two brigs. She could bring 3 guns to bear at any time. The fastest in the fleet and probably on all the lakes. Noah Brown said, "Nothing on the lakes could sail with her." She was started at Lee's Run and then moved to Cascade Creek where her keel was lengthened by 10 feet. She was Perry's 3rd flagship. He used her after the battle until he left the lake on October 25, 1813 at Buffalo. While at Buffalo she was ordered to try and help get the grounded Chippewa off the beach. While trying to rescue the beach Chippewa, she broke an anchor cable and was washed up on shore further down the lake to the west. Being so late in the season, the storms and high waves prevented any further attempt at rescue. Jess Elliott was ordered by the Secretary of the Navy to secure all ships that had been grounded: Chippewa, Trip, Little Belt and Ariel. He spent 2 weeks at Buffalo with the work gang from Erie, laying down ways and removing valuable stores in addition to rigging them down for winter, with the hope of refloating them in the spring after ice off. This was not to be. December 31, 1813 the British raided Buffalo, burned the town and the ships, except Ariel, which had been grounded further down the lake at a place by Barracks Creek now called Woodlawn Beach. There she lay till spring. A shipwright by the name of Thomas B. Eyre had been sent by the Navy to repair battle damage to the ships at Erie and to refloat the Ariel. While towing her, Eyre lost Ariel in a trough due to her ballast having been removed. She laid on her beam, filled with water, and went down. She lies on the bottom of Lake Erie somewhere off Barracks Creek. Ariel's formidable armament. The U.S. schooner Scorpion. Here is a detail from the Sully and Kearney painting. Notice the beautiful lines of a brown-built schooner. No wonder why they were fast. I think Sully and Kearney must have seen her after the Battle of Lake Erie at Catawba Point or Cleveland. An extremely well done and accurate painting. Scorpion was later captured by the British during the campaign to retake Fort Mackinac. Scorpion's sting. Nothing fancy. Plain work out of green wood. Purpose-built shallow drafted vessels. Good enough to win one fight. If not, good enough to be captured. The American brigs were built in the most economical way to take advantage of their 300-pound short-range broadside. Secretary of the Navy Jones' unofficial order is to keep it cheap. Remember, he is also Secretary of the Treasury too. The brigs are identical, but Perry was said to have picked the Lawrence for his flagship because he liked her framing better. Later, in 1814, under Arthur Sinclair's command, the Niagara, his flagship, that's where flagship Niagara really gets her name, developed problems with her framing due to the greenwood warping. HMS Shannon did not fight USS Chesapeake until June 1, 1813. The brig Lawrence was hastily named after that, in honor of fallen James Lawrence. One can only speculate what Perry's brig would have been named if Chesapeake would have defeated Shannon. The Battle of Lake Erie by Thomas Birch. One of the best examples of the ships ever drawn, except for the Irvine drawing. It fully shows Noah Brown's genius at designing vessels. Beautiful sweet lines. Note Lawrence in the foreground in funerary black. Note the Niagara in plain oiled lightwood and pitch bulwarks, no yellow paint. I think Birch came to Erie after October 25, 1813 and finished his painting standing on the shore of Misery Bay using Lawrence and Niagara as subjects. Note the amazing detail. Note how the yards are tipped to let water run off them. This would not be so if they were underway. The ships of the Royal Provincial Marine. HMS Detroit, HMS Queen Charlotte, HMS Lady Prevost, HMS Hunter, also known as General Hunter, HMS Chippewa, HMS Little Belt. Friends Goodwill, built at Black Rock by Captain William Lee in 1810, captured by the British at Mackinac Island during the start of the war. Commissioned HMS Little Belt. Little Belt's gun deck at the time of the battle. Also an American ship, captured at the same time as the Salina, Dobbin's ship and Friends Goodwill at Mackinac Island. While carrying baggage for General Harrison after the Battle of Lake Erie, in preparation for the Battle of the Thames, the Chippewa was blown down the length of Lake Erie in a bad storm. In an incredible act of seamanship, David C. Brunel managed to beach the vessel and save all but one aboard. She would be the first vessel grounded at Black Rock. The Chippewa might have looked like this. The General Hunter was built as a multi-purpose vessel for the Royal Provincial Marine in 1806, by Master Shipwright William Bell. By the time of the Battle of Lake Erie, she was already 7 years old. She was originally rigged as a schooner, then converted to a brig. She was a slow sailer, and with no bulwarks not much of a fighter. A hodgepodge of guns and no bulwarks. She could throw 16 pounds long range and 28 pounds up close. Back when the Hunter carried fur pelts, this armament was enough to keep troublesome Indians away when they attacked in their canoes. She was seriously outgunned by any ship in the American fleet. A 12-pound carronade at Port Clinton, Ohio. From the General Hunter. Clearly a ship built for an earlier era on Lake Erie. She was ill-suited for a fleet battle against the Americans. This is the General Hunter today on the shores of Lake Huron, Southampton Beach in Ottawa, Canada. There are plans to hopefully one day build a museum here. The HMS Lady Prevost, a topsail schooner with bulwarks and heavily framed. Built at the Amherstburg shipyard in 1811 by Master Shipwright William Bell. 95 tons burden weight. 72 feet long, 20-foot beam, 9-foot draft. Her rudder was shattered in the battle. Beautiful lines. An impressive bell-built, topsail schooner of war. My early interpretation of the lady's gun deck. The 12-pound carronades would make a formidable opponent. At close range she could throw 78-pound broadside and at long range an 18-pound broadside. With heavy framing she could go toe-to-toe. Had she not lost her rudder she might have played a bigger part in the battle. This is a good picture of the gun deck. I find the argument for this gun deck very convincing. Commanded by Captain Robert A. Finnis, Royal Navy, who along with his first officer were killed in the opening minutes of the battle, probably from one of Caledonia's or Niagara's long 12s. Slightly smaller than the American brigs. She was stoutly built. After the Battle of Lake Erie, she was re-rigged as a brig and used till the end of the war. She was sunk in Misery Bay in 1815 to preserve her. She was raised in 1825 and sold to George Brown of Erie, who converted her to a merchantman. As a merchantman, she had a short life. Her iron spikes and nails were half rotted through due to being submerged at Misery Bay, and she did not last long. A formidable armament. A 192-pound broadside and a 24-pound long-range broadside, the heaviest in the British fleet. Like the American brigs, deadly at close range. She had an advantage that the American brigs didn't have. A pivot gun. The corvette HMS Detroit left Amherstburg at 3:00 p.m. on Thursday, September 9, 1813, for her date with Destiny. She had a short life as a ship of His Majesty's service, just over 24 hours. She had no shakedown cruise and her guns were borrowed from the defenses of Amherstburg. As a matter of fact, everything that went into the Detroit was borrowed from one ship or another in the British fleet on Lake Erie. With supply lines cut by the Americans, William Bell had to make do. The battle was going to be a hard one. The guns borrowed would be no less than 6 different calibers and no flintlocks to fire them. But she was stoutly built with heavy framing and bulwarks. Everyone knows the outcome, so I won't get into that, but I will tell you what happened to her. The Detroit's gun deck. Not even are the port and starboard batteries the same. The Detroit carried the biggest long-range guns in the British fleet. She had a 114-pound long-range broadside and 138 pounds using the starboard carronade at close range. However, it is evident in the opening minutes of the battle this ship did the most damage to the Lawrence. An effective use of long-range firepower. The flagship HMS Detroit. This drawing was done on the 12th of September, 1813 by Provincial Marine Lieutenant Robert Irvin, standing on the shore of South Bass looking to the left of Middle Bass. The evening before, on the 11th, a violent white squall had ripped through Put-in Bay, and the remaining masts of the Detroit and all but the foremast of the Queen Charlotte went overboard. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is one of the best from a historical aspect. Note the condition of the Lawrence to the far right. Still afloat in both masts and most of her rig still intact even after this violent storm. A far cry from some of the accounts. The Lawrence, with temporary repairs, made sail for Erie on the 21st of September as a hospital ship with Lieutenant John Yarnell in command. The Queen in Detroit remained at Put-in-Bay for the winter, and Niagara returns to Erie with the Ariel on the 22nd of October. The Niagara and Lawrence would go through an extensive refit in early spring 1814, preformed by shipwright Thomas B. Ayers, and were used in Commodore Sinclair's attempt to retake Fort Michilimackinac. The Queen Charlotte would be re-rigged as a brig for the defense of Lake Erie in the absence of Lawrence and Niagara. The war would draw to a close, and the four largest ships would be sunk at Misery Bay for preservation. The Porcupine, along with the Ghent, a pilot schooner built to replace Ariel, would be the last men standing. They formed the core of the revenue cutter service on the lakes and were used for many years until worn out. In 1825 the four that were sunk are sold and resold many times. The Queen and the Detroit are raised and refitted as merchantmen. The Lawrence in 1875 is raised, exhibited and accidentally burned. Niagara remains in her sleep until 1912, when she is raised and rebuilt. The Detroit has the saddest end. In 1841 she was found a derelict and purchased by a group of merchants from Niagara Falls for a spectacle. She met her end September 15, 1841, when she was sent over the falls and passed into history. Recently a replica was planned by a Canadian group, but it too has fallen through. The half-finished ship was sold to settle the project's debits. An organization from Rhode Island bought her and will finish her. She will be renamed the Tall Ship Oliver Hazard Perry.
My son John was tall and slim, and he had a leg for every limb. But now he's got no legs at all, for he ran a race with a cannonball. Timmy Roo-dum-da, fall-a-riddle-da, whack for a riddle, Timmy Roo-dum-da. Oh, were you deaf or were you blind when you left your two fine legs behind? Or was it sailing on the sea? Wore your two fine legs right down to your knee? Timmy Roo-dum-da, fall-a-riddle-da, whack for a riddle, Timmy Roo-dum-da. I was not deaf, I was not blind when I left my two fine legs behind. Nor was it sailing on the sea, wore me two fine legs right down to me knee, Timmy Roo-dum-da, fall-a-riddle-da, whack for a riddle, Timmy Roo-dum-da. But I was tall and I was slim, and I had a leg for every limb. But now I've got no legs at all, they were both shot away by a cannonball, Timmy Roo-dum-da, fall-a-riddle-da, whack for a riddle, Timmy Roo-dum-da. Fall-a-riddle-da, whack for a riddle, Timmy Roo-dum-da.